Welcome to the Burntsienna Artbook Review. I'm Jason E.C. Wright. In lieu of a formal introduction, because we're just starting this, I used to do a kind of Instagram takeover for Arcana books. And what I found was, as I was encouraging people to share their books, people were kind of just listening to me talk about the books that I was fond of and why I had them. And so I thought, well, that sounds more like a book review than a show and tell. So we are introducing this series. I'm going to go through 5 books and 1 bonus today. And they're in the categories of art, cinematography, design, fashion, and photography. So first up is James John. This is Pareidolia. Pareidolia is defined as the ability to see shapes in abstract things. So think seeing a face in the clouds, or the constellations in the night sky, what have you. It's kind of what happens with the Rorschach test. But James John, incredibly prolific illustrator, Taiwanese born, lived in New York, currently lives and works in Los Angeles. And this was gifted to me by a neighbor of mine for my birthday last year. And I was not familiar with James John's work. And so this kind of was a retrospective of a lot of the non-mainstream things that has been done by James John. And so just kind of giving a quick glimpse through. I'm not going to cover every single page, but a few that I have tabbed, just to give you an idea of what's inside of this book and the style and range of his illustrations. One of the interesting things is that James has done a lot of work both for Marvel and DC Comics. He's done work with Guillermo del Toro, has also done work on film posters, has done some really interesting advertising work, did some stuff with Prada, the fashion brand, both from poster work as well as things I think that were actually directly printed onto garment. So that's a very interesting thing. The foreword of this is by Takashi Murakami as well as Guillermo del Toro. And it's really just some awesome illustration and art here. I can only imagine what it would be like to see some of these pieces hung, printed, or otherwise presented. So it's very surreal. I wouldn't even say absurdist or overly detailed or dreamlike. It's kind of just, this is clearly what he was thinking about and was enjoying himself exploring, which I think is also kind of the key when you're in an artistic practice. Yeah, some of it is about making sure that you're making things that will be viable for others to consume. But a lot of times it's just get the work off. Put out what you see in whatever style that it presents itself. What your style is, what your approach is, it'll be revealed to you through the body of work that you do. This segment is my favorite. It's your actual scans of his notebook and sketchbook, which I thought was really fantastic to be able to get to. And being able to do that is, like you just sit on a bus, on a train, in any public space and kind of sketch for a while. And again, your style will be shown back to you just through consistency of practice. But these scans of his various notebooks and sketchbooks still give a lot of understanding of where some of his other works have come from. But also, some of them are completely out of context and just, wild sketches. Just that's what it is. But you have to get the ideas out. Otherwise, they will stay inside of your brain. And if they stay inside of your brain, well, that's not exactly the best soil for them to grow. So, this has been James John's Pareidolia. Highly recommended if you're interested in illustration, ideas for posters. There's a great glossary in the back. And the cool thing is that while I'm normally notoriously anti-dust jacket, this one converts into a poster. So maybe one day I'll flatten that out and hang that as a piece of art. Continuing our series, we have The Art and Soul of Blade Runner 2049. This film by Denis Villeneuve was incredibly brain shattering to me, and I think it was the first film that brought to my mind what it was that I actually watch movies for, and it's the cinematography. I could say special effects growing up, I could say writing for some things, but realistically, I like really pretty movies. Really love really, really well shot, well illustrated, well orchestrated films, but I love beautifully shot films. Um, my friend Alan Daniel and I actually saw this film with a few other friends of ours. We came out of it and the decision was very split between who liked it and who didn't, and it was very clear that we had saw the same film, but we watched a totally different movie. And Alan and I found ourselves very much so in love with the cinematography of this particular film. So of course, when the art book was available, made sure to immediately purchase that. So let's do a quick flip through of the art and soul of Blade Runner 2049. You have these amazing full bleed images throughout. Talk with the director, cast and crew. The cool thing about this is seeing how shots are planned. It's very similar to the blocking that's utilized in comic and graphic novels. Also, just one moment for all of the people that work in the design of vehicles and worlds and ephemera and gadgets and things. That's a whole different fun thing that I'd love to just bird's eye view on one day. But the scale of the film is expressed in the scale of the book, which I really love. Something that Denis Villeneuve does really well. It's also very much so a film noir, a neo-film noir, which shadows and light. And those are the things that as a photographer and as an amateur cinematographer, I really am a fan of. Is just, how do you tell a story with light and shadow? How do you bring characters more to life? How do you give more gravity to a thing? Wong Kar-wai's work is full of this. Shout out to Roger Deakins as well, cinematographer on many, many things that you will love, but definitely on this film here. But just the being able to fall into the world through the book itself. This is just another example of how you can document a process as well and make it as beautiful and enrapturing as the reference that is from. And per usual, not flipping through every page, but just flipping through enough for you to get an idea of why this book may or may not be for you. But if you are a aspiring cinematographer, if you're a street photographer that wants to add more cinematic quality to your street photography, if you're a colorist, this is fantastic reference. Oh my goodness, like I can only imagine all the LUT packs that people would be trying to unpack from looking at just this book. But it also goes through semi-chronologically of the events in the film. So you get an idea of feeling the journey of the film through the journey of the book. And then these huge sweeping scenes of loss and melancholy and still the slightest glimmer of hope, but the scale is what gives you so much of a feeling of falling into a world. And yeah, this is one of my favorite examples of a book on cinematography. I'm very glad that I have it. The field of design is one that I think it's a misnomer for a lot of times because some people will just use the term very loosely, not associated with any part of the industry. And some people are very, very protective of that framing of the discipline and the approach to design thinking and what that means. But all the way around, design is anything that was crafted or made with the intention for use, utility, or other human end user receipt. And few people have done that better than Juhl, Danish architect, designer, largely responsible for introducing Danish design and modernism to the US. This is a book by Hatje, Cantz, and Anne-Louise Sommer that are at the Watercolors. So kind of giving you the idea of before the advent of, graphic design programs and things of that nature, you would have to hand color all of the illustrations to give someone an idea of what something could be and look like. And so as someone who is a huge fan of process, and being able to see the way that someone's work opens up. This is a fantastic book for me to see. I also am a huge fan of draftsman drawings. Took an architectural designing course at one point. There was a funny story that I was the architect that never was, because loved architecture, never wanted to go to school for it. But the drawings, perspective drawings, were always fantastic to me. And this is all watercolor shading, all on heavy laid craft paper. Understanding the way that writing in all capital block letters was a way to make sure that everything could be legible is part of the reason why that's the way that I write now. So that all comes from, the introductions that I got to draft plans and blueprints and architectural drawings as a youngster. And this book expands on that a lot, like explaining how, something could look in situ, the way that a chair or a sofa or even a wall divider could be installed and exist in space, but then also cross sections, right? You get an idea of the deeper mechanics of how something is made, designing it for that making, but even like the idea of putting the shading in here to give an idea of depth and weight is really cool. If you look back here, you can kind of faintly see some of just the rough sketches before you get into the full coloring. So that part's always fun. Same thing here. You have this pencil line sketch of it in one frame or one perspective, and then here it is turned on its side. It's really, really fantastic to just peek in and hope to be a fly on the wall across time, which is one of my favorite things about art and design books, especially when you get into the architecture of simple things that are seemingly mundane, like cutlery, bowls and teapots, all the way to the trusteeship council chamber of the UN. This man did a lot, and everything is planned. There's a level of design and intentionality to whatever you engage with within your everyday life. And somebody thought about it. Somebody thought about the way this book was designed. Someone thought about the way that this device that I'm using is designed. Someone thought about the phone and all of the clothing that we wear, the tables that we engage with, the spaces that we live in. Someone thought about all of these things. Someone thought about the buttons on the elevator. Someone thought about the buttons on your shirt. All these things have to be thought about and sketched to at least show what the idea is to whoever's going to actually be making this by hand. And that says a lot about the amount of time, every time that you engage with anything, you're receiving the product of somebody's thought. You're living in the reality of somebody else's dream. You're living in somebody else's imagination. So what also is in your imagination that you could bring out into the world for others to engage with? These are my favorite questions. It's a nice biography in the back, quick bullet point list, but this book, it's a lot of fun. It's fantastic for anybody that's into industrial design, interiors, furniture, fans of furniture. Watercolors by Juhl. All right, let's talk Margiela. Anyone that has had half a conversation with me and has talked about fashion is very well aware of my appreciation of Martin and his eponymous house. My friend Bliss Foster is a incredible depth of knowledge on his YouTube channel about the history of Martin Margiela and Maison Martin Margiela. But this magazine here, this re-release of the 2004 issue of a magazine curated by, is one of my favorite things to look at. For one, it's a bit of a time capsule. For two, it kind of plays with a lot of the themes that Martin and the Maison were known for, which is kind of hiding behind the process and pushing those that are making it to the forefront. But it was also just a lot of fun. a lot of fun. A magazine curated by is a magazine that allows a designer to take over and basically create a story of understanding the origins or modus operandi of their particular craft and the way that they approach design. And so the first issues, I believe, were like, number A, number B, number C, number D, number E, until they got to this one, which is a magazine curated by Maison Martin Margiela in 2004. It proved so popular, it set off the entire publishing run of this for many, many years, and they were kind enough in 2021 to re-release this. The coolest thing about this, I think, is that this kind of glossy acrylic slide cover is statically attached, but comes right off, and it's really fantastic there. The color white has been used throughout Margiela's tenure, and I believe it was more so about just showing age. White just shows time in a way that most other colors don't. And so he played with the shade across so many different mediums. But there are so many contributors and parallel designers that have contributed ideas and articles and write-ups to this particular magazine. The photography goes from editorial to moody to documentary to abstract and surreal. There's even a few ads in here. I believe there's an absolute ad in here that I thought was really fantastic. This image still, to this day, gets to me because it speaks to Martin's approach and the Maison's way of deconstructing things, which is just reminding you that everything comes from things that were before. But again, if you can get your hands on this, and you're a fan of origin stories like I am, especially if you want ideas of how to go backward to move forward, how to root yourself in what already exists, whether it's from the amount of clothing that's already been produced that you can reimagine to just using what's there. It's a very punk DIY approach to things. That's one of my favorite things. It's kind of basically the recipe for making the legendary sock shirt, which is really cool. But it was always about just sharing the craft and inviting people into it, which is one of many of the numerous reasons why his legacy is going to continue on for a very, very long time. Also, at some point we'll probably review the Hermes years here because that definitely bears some exploration. Photography as a medium has always held a certain sway over me. I've really loved the way of documenting things that I do on a day-to-day basis, but it's also really fantastic when you talk about the artistic approach to it. Street photography with, people like the Vivian Myers and the Bill Cunninghams and various other people that have taken this and done so many other things. But then you also have the Gordon Parks and the Saul Leiters, people that were kind of capturing more of the almost mundane scenes of everyday life. And Fred Herzog is a German photographer who immigrated to the States post-war times and actually found his way to Vancouver, Canada. And so this book by Hatje Cantz is a book on his works and walks through Vancouver and being able to kind of showcase a bit of the day-to-day of people in Vancouver during the post-war period, the late 50s, early 60s. So just kind of going through here. He was known for the work that he did with his Leica, and as a person that aspires to get to such a point and proficiency where, yes, we are using whatever we want to shoot. Leicas have been the glass and the systems that have become kind of synonymous with top tier in photojournalism, but also extensively used by hobbyists. But also, for myself personally, I've shot on many things. A Leica is one of the few cameras that captures what I see in my brain as directly as possible with minimal needs for edits, from depth of field to saturation to clarity to, there's a certain type of warmth that you get from Leica glass, which is really fantastic, especially when you're shooting human scenes and scenes of people and places. So it's also interesting to note that these photos were just photos he was capturing, but you look back on it and it becomes a time capsule. It's something that was important to note. What was going on? What is the mundane? What is the things that we take for granted now that we'll look back on with nostalgia in future years? These are the reasons why I encourage anyone at every level of experience to go out with a camera, go out with your phone and Capture whatever it is that you see around you. Capture events. Capture people walking their dogs. Capture somebody grabbing coffee. Capture the buildings around you, because urban development / gentrification, they may not always be there. But more importantly, be a witness. Be a witness to what's going on around you, because you never know how long or how short that's going to be.